The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. Still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont, HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Kilauea volcano update. And a little bit of Manalo, I'll touch base there too, but not much going on. Today, Thursday, March 17th, 2022. You guys are looking at a time-lapse from the KW camera from the USGS HVO over the last week, showing the conditions of what's been happening in Kilauea over the past week, which will be our first topic of discussion here today. We'll be discussing viewer questions as we go along, so submit your questions to Dane. He'll answer what he can in the chat. Let him know if you have any issues with your audio or video as well. And we will recap what's been going on the volcano for you guys over this past week. And in short, it's been pretty steady viewing within the national park. The eruption has had a series of back-to-back pauses. Quasi-pauses, really. We've been calling them pauses, but the lava hasn't really fully stopped all the way. We currently are in one of these deflationary cycles where there is less lava on the surface, but according to the most recent USGS report, they're expecting lava to stay circulating at the surface at a slower rate during this downdrop in effusion. Rather than stopping completely, it seems to be, at least for present, expected to just slow down. So we'll dive into that a little bit. We'll discuss the archways that have been present between these different ponds, right? If you haven't joined us recently, we have this smallest, uppermost. We've been calling it the West Vent Pond, where the lava comes up the most vigorously. It seems to cascade down through a little spillway into this main active lava lake, which has been called the intermittent lava lake because it's been starting and stopping with deflation and inflation events over the past few months. And then there's a third one down here. That's bottom right, southeast corner of that intermittent one, which seems to spill over, and it also has developed an archway in the past week. So we'll look at that as well as we come along here. So to summarize what's been happening over the past week, here is a plot of our 1 week tilt. And I show this to start. I'll kind of scroll up. Our lava depth meter is no longer updating to the web over the past week, so we can't rely on that. We've established a proxy before that it's really mirroring the tilt for the most part. We don't know exactly that that's the case, but that's our assumption now. And so here's our tilt for the last week, and you can see that we've had 2 larger deflation and then reinflation events, one, and then here's a second one that we're currently in right now. So that's the slowdown. The lava didn't stop entirely for very long, it seemed like, during this previous lull here and reservoir pressure. So that's interesting to consider how the different connections of the ponds may affect that here. Over the last month, here's the 1 month plot of lava depth. So you can see that we were having some connectivity issues back at the beginning of the month. It seems like the data feed gave out somewhere earlier in the month here. So we know that they flew out there to that area today to restore at least one of the webcams. We'll discuss that. So perhaps this will come back online soon as well, we can hope. So over the last month, here's the summit tilt. You can see that earlier part with that established connection of deflation and inflation mirroring the drops in lava level. Although we can see more clearly now that we've had a very, very slight inflationary tilt over the last month here, right? Not very much, maybe a 1 microradian over that entire course, which is barely anything, but it's still mostly flattish, but with a slight increase here, which is a little different than before. Okay, so along with that variation, we've had a little bit of wind and weather-induced drop in emissions here. A couple of days of rain here earlier in the week right here. But otherwise, you can see that there's variations also from deflation, inflation events, and other output variations that go along with that gas. So what I'm trying to say is the gas and the lava are still tied 1-to-1. When lava is coming out vigorously, then the gas is as well, and then when it's not, it's not. So maybe it's been a little bit more steady without these big drops, but you can see here earlier in the month we're still having that big fluctuation. This lower plot's showing the integrated measurement from USGS HPO. You can see here for a period of time where they have a lot of data in a short window, you can see this resolution of it dropping and rising similar to the tilt. And you see this gap in gas at the same time in a fixed monitor here with high peaks on either side. That's kind of the pattern we're seeing here, and maybe some more emissions that are steadier recently here. So that's the main impact of people, is still the gas, and so that's what we're focusing on first. Really, the lava is still within the crater, no signs of it going anywhere else. So it's really a great time for viewing and not any time to worry about the lava hazard apart from just general everyday preparation for all of our disasters, of course. Here's our VOG forecast from the VMAP, VOG mapping project from the University of Hawaii, Manoa. And there's our sulfur dioxide source, Kilauea volcano right here. And you can see SO2 is that direct gas coming out, and I can switch it to SO4, the particulate matter that develops as that gas reacts with the sunlight and moisture in the air there. So you can see it's mostly in southwest Hawaii Island, but a little bit in the saddle, and it is blowing offshore to some degree as well. But we're having a little bit less slack winds coming down to spring than we were earlier in the year. You may see less of the VOG in the Hilo area here, but still occasionally coming off in that direction. So fairly minor effects. So minor that if I reload this page current here. Much so that all the viewing areas right around the Caldera within the national park are all showing green and have been for the entire viewing season here that we've been having since this eruption began 5 months ago. So the national park has got all kinds of other information on their webpage about viewing, locations, like preparation, all that kind of stuff. So check with them for viewing, but we'll update the viewing conditions here. And as usual, we'll talk about Kanakakoi as our main viewing location. We'll start off with that. That's the area that looks and sees essentially this northwest part of that innermost crater floor pit right there. And that's just due to the cliffs that are in a way, right? Everything is inset within different zones of collapse. So the direct line of sight is different from different points around the Caldera Rim. So the best viewing area is this one, but it does require that 1 mile walk to get to each way. So not for everyone. There is a much shorter walk paved area to this viewing area by Uikahuna, but it's much more intermittent. You're looking at this area on the northeast part of the crater floor over here, which has lava flows. They're not as vigorous and not as consistent, but they can be quite large at times as well. So those are the areas, and we'll talk about one other area today, which is Waldron's Ledge over here, and we'll come to that and give it its proper Hawaiian name. When we run a USGS map on that, right? So talk about viewing from the east side here as well. Volcano House not really as good, but there is a spot right over here where you can see through this gap and see a little bit. We'll show you some video. But starting off with Kenikakoi area, we like to use a S1 camera as our proxy. The reason being the S1 camera is somewhere in an area, I'm not sure exactly, but I would guess it's somewhere in here. So it has a view that's looking down in this area, something similar to what you see from that area, right? So the first thing to notice is that of the view, a lot of it's dark, right? I can put it on a daytime frame here. The active lava surface presently is still less than 2.5% of the entire crater floor. So it's a really small area in a much larger landscape. And most of what we show you guys is really zoomed in or from the cameras or cropped or all that kind of thing. So we'll show this one at its full frame. View from the S1 camera. This is the west vent complex over here with the vents putting out occasional spatter bursts. Sometimes small little flows. I don't see very many of those over the last week here. That might come down in some of these cones. Overall, the lava has been rising up out of that west pond vent and flowing through this spillway into this main active lava lake area. And then here you can see in the foreground that third lowest cascaded pond, right? So before we'll focus on this connection a little more when we get to our media here shortly. But you can see that the overall pattern of circulation has been pretty steady. Occasional ooze-up flows along the back wall visible right there. And occasionally there's an overflow that comes when this west vent spills over to the northwest over here to the backside. At the more recent part of this loop. Otherwise, on the crater floor, still have some glowing cracks in some areas, putting out some fume. I haven't seen any real evidence of lava activity from those areas right now, recently over the last week. But you can still see that there is activity and still some glowing cracks there. That's our proxy view from Kenikakoi. The most recent S1 camera view is here, maybe from about an hour ago. I'll zoom it in so you can see the lava level has actually dropped down quite a bit, but it still seems to be in a more shallow manner circulating within this collapse pit right in there. You can see that our lowest cascading pond in the foreground right over here seems to have a much lower lava level all the way down in here. You can see that there's a notch in this division that separates the two. And this is where our archway used to exist before these things are only temporary, so it has already collapsed and may reform at some point, we'll see. But you can see that there's a notch there, and it seems the lava level is now below that notch and is not pouring into here, not going on there, and so it seems like the lava seems to be subsiding within that pit there. That's our current view of the S1 camera. So that's the current outlook of what you might see tonight. USGS has been putting out these status updates every afternoon around 3 o'clock, and so here is the one from today. It says that deflation resumed this morning, now appears to be neither deflating nor inflating. There's fluctuations in tremor and short time scales. The level of the lava lake has dropped significantly, although it continues to enter and circulate within the main area of the lava lake. Based on previous observations over the last week, lava will likely be on the surface of the active lava lake this evening, but activity will likely be less rigorous than earlier. But activity will be less likely. I can't even say it. But activity will likely be less rigorous than earlier this week. There we go. So that's very interesting, right? That we're having lower levels of lava, but it's still continuing to be active on the surface without being rigorous. That's maybe a one-time change we'll have to see here. We'll start off by looking at this F1 camera here. But one thing to consider as we look at this lava lake, and I'll zoom it into here, this near part of this, what I've been calling the West Pond Vent, and the main lake here, and this lowest cascading pond right over there. Right, what we've seen before is lava would come up in this pit, and we'd see it evident within there, overturning, and we would not see it reaching all the way into this main active part. And it seems like now, this most recent iteration, we're still seeing some glow in here, but it's not as bright, and we're seeing not any evidence on the surface between here of lava moving from one spot to the other, but we are seeing resurfacing of the lake surface beyond what you'd expect just with that crystal overturning process, right? It seems like there's still some lava feeding into it enough to keep that process going. So that anyone who's viewing the lava lake, if you happen to catch it during one of these rare lulls where the lava is stopped moving on the surface, it's likely to be overturning sometime very soon, and then you'll see the whole thing flash over. At some point, it's going to be re-injected and reflush and refill. That's the pattern over the last week or so, apparently, right? So that's interesting to think about. If maybe the connection between this most western pond and this main pond has become a little bit more reliable, right? Maybe it's open, a little bit more open somehow, or who knows exactly, right? But we'll have to watch and see if this continues, or if this happens to be the consequence of not having had any inflation events that are very long, because that's part of it as well. We haven't had any very, very large and very, very long ones in a while, and it could be that if that happens, then it resets the whole process. So right now, we're in this seemingly more open state, and that makes for better viewing, even better than that great viewing we've been having over the last weeks, but since it's more steady and more reliable. Okay, so that's that Kīlauea zone, but I like to look at this F1 camera as well, because this gives us a view of the other ooze-ups happening around the perimeter of the crater. So we've seen ooze-ups that were visible from Kīlauea here, and its overflow in the northwest quadrant, and there are also ooze-ups happening, you can tell, off the camera over here on the right, on the south side, not really visible from anywhere with a glow. But this zone all through here is a zone that is possibly visible from that Uekahuna northern area, right? And so you can see that there was one large flash with big flows at the beginning of last weekend. You can see it's petered out, and sometimes you see maybe just a few little flows oozing out. We've looped back, so here comes the big flash, the big ooze up. There it is. And you can see that if you're lucky, you can really see some cool activity there from Mauna as well. And so that's the summary of what you can see there. We'll check it on an F1 camera right now, and you can see that even though the lava level is down and not really visible within that, at least from this angle, right, within that lowest cascaded pond, and not really visible here within this closest west vent pond, where in the past it was, right? So maybe it's sitting lower and it can connect through some lower pathway. You do see some glow right there, right? It seems like there is a pathway still, lava still feeding into that main active lake area right there. All right, I did mention there was a camera back online. That's our famous B1 camera. It's on a down drop block. The most recent view is right here. Could possibly reload it. It might be a little more sunsetty. Not quite that dark anymore. Our broadcast time, but there it is. You can see all that gas. Not a whole lot of lava visible on this eastern quadrant right now. But this camera, you can see this 24-hour time lapse has got images from back to 9 o'clock this morning. It seems like it was put online back this morning. So this is where we suspect that USGS flew out there onto that area to repair this camera transmission, and possibly that lava. Well, actually, I'm not sure if that the lava level is from a different location. Good to see this B1 camera back online. Okay, from this eastern part, I'm just going to point out, I'm going to zoom it way in here. You can start to see this west vent complex on this far side of the crater where most of the gas is and the lava lake is. You can see just these little peaks and silhouetted against this background back over here, right? And just to remind you guys that active lava lake area is all right in here, so that's that 2.5%. So when you're coming to view, it's good to bring binoculars or a telescope or really big lens for your camera, what have you, those kind of things as well. So right, that's the V1 camera. That's the view a little more from the east. And so here's a USGS map that was put out last week. And on this zoomed in view, here's a down drop block. That B1 camera is somewhere in an area over here, more or less. And it's looking like that whole field of view like that, right? So we're looking all the way across a crater to see those vents over here. And then much in the foreground of that it looked like hardened, not moving silvery lava all through here with those few little islands. Yeah, I point this out because the USGS map actually has properly labeled Kupina'i over here, which is the high point of this Caldera rim that is by the former Waldron Ledge overlook, right? It's still, the overlook is still there, of course, but it was part of the road that went around a crater before the collapse of the road during the earthquake in the 80s. So Waldron's Ledge is a commonly known name, Kupina'i right over there. You can see it's not far around a corner from Volcano House. So from Volcano House, I tried to look. I couldn't quite see the same view. It could be that as the lava lake surface is rising higher, it's about to emerge and become visible there, but not quite the same view. Whereas from Kupina'i, Waldron's Ledge over here looking in this direction, we couldn't see the actual lava surface, but we could see all these vents over here. And so I'll show you that video right here. And this is just oh. Here it is. Right there, so you can see quite a lot of fume coming from the foreground there. The vents are just coming in and out of view, right? But you can see there's a taller one and smaller one over here. The lava lake surface you can see is just below this ledge in the foreground right over here. But possibly this west pond vent back over here, if it's up high and spilling over, it might be visible. The lava might be visible from right there, and you possibly could see the flows coming off in this backside over here. There's a zone of a lot of fume right here in the foreground. This is part of that spillway from that west pond vent into that main lava lake area. So that kind of identifying marker, I'll show you that kind of different. So having seen that, let's advance here to show you guys. This is first an image from USGS released this past week, March 11th, view of the lava lake, when there is the reverse angle seen from the west now, but there is that west pond vent and spillway coming in and that zone of fume right there that's obscuring, as we saw from the opposite direction, smaller cones and the bigger ones over here on this side. Right over. So there's that view. We're more used to seeing this V1 camera, USGS HVO webcam. And the V1, you can see here's a whole last week. It's compiled by Dane, Mahalo Dane. Mahalo Bob Martin for image capture as well. Helps us have those multiple sources to just for be more robust here. So here you can see the lava level drop here in the west vent, rise back up, spills over to the south. You can see there's been quite a bit of spatter over this west vent complex. It's not really given justice during this very fast time lapse here, but you see occasional bursts being caught in the camera, which goes to show that they're happening very frequently. And very steady activity here on the left. And if I zoom it in a bit, hand it over into the spillway area right over here, focusing more on that now that we've seen the vents, right? There is a little bit of a narrow spot right over here. You can see as the lava level rises all the way up and comes down, it does form a temporary archway there as well on that entry point from the spillway into this lowest lava lake. But this is not the only point. There it is right there. There. Not the only point that we've seen archways here before. We've seen archways here in a foreground area before too. So as we just wrap up the V1 camera here, just going to recap. Like, reason I first show this is all this spatter is something that is visible from that Waldron Ledge, Untitled area from the east as well, right? And possibly these overflows. So this is part of our viewing dive here. What could you see? And maybe you can't see the lava lake itself, but you can see a lot of these bursts coming out, right? So pretty cool. You probably get some pretty cool long exposures. Okay, so focusing back to the archways here and here, I'm gonna pause this and we're gonna pull us back to, oh no, not yet. V1 camera, current view right now. There it is, lots of fume, lower lava level, and cones. Okay. Now I'm gonna pull us back to February 18th. This is a screen capture of that first archway where this is really blown up. Here's that whole West Pond vent in the foreground here, and you can see that it was flowing through the spillway and had left a high point archway there as well. Right, so that's the one from a month ago, right? Was the 18th of February. And here's an image was just released March 15th of the archway between that lowest pond on the southeast and the main active lava lake. So there it is. You can see it's just some lava spatter. You see the archway below. You can see all the way through it. This more silvery crust. That's the active lava in the daytime. Would be seen to be glowing red if it was nighttime there. And you kind of an oval shaped. It looks like it's rounded off here at the bottom. And this is the reverse view of what we saw as a notch in our S1 camera here recently. So that's our most zoomed in view. You zoom it out a bit. Here is that image released from USGS. There is that little archway right there. And the puka, the opening, the gap, right? That the lava was spilling over from this lake into that other pit, right? And it seems like they both seem to recede at similar rates in sync. But if the lava stops flowing in here, then this one starts to recede a little more because this one is being fed from the other side still. And we'll zoom it out one more time. This is when the lava level was a little bit higher still. So there is our West Pond vent, spillway with the gas spots and the fume, active lava lake, and here is the lowest arch down in there, the one that was present most recently here, and the one from a month ago, all through there. Lots of different archways forming along these connection points, different lava ponds. Interesting stuff how it's something slightly different to talk about every week here. And one last view while we're finishing up our media of the week released by the USGS here. There is that 2.5% area right down in there of that entire crater floor all through there. Right? How everything fits within the grander context of the collapsed Caldera floor. All this is within that lowermost pit right here. And below that, there's this whole down drop block area. So it still has that whole cliff to fill the innermost crater as it is now. And then to spill out into that next level of crater, and then beyond that, there's another level of crater way over here. So that's, of course, why it's not spilling out and getting close to anyone at any point. Soon here. Has to change, something's got to change underground with the plumbing. So we'll look at that shortly here as well. But first, we'll turn to our time lapse of the week, which is really looking at this curiosity of these archways here, and zoomed into just a clip of this last one forming here. So here is that whole sequence, and I'll have it on a loop here. I know we had a time lapse of the week that was similar to this recently, but didn't have an archway in it, so we're gonna run it back here one more time. So there it is. You can see the most recent gap. Lava level drops at the beginning of the clip. It forms the archway, drains down. You can see it drains in this closer pit faster than it does in the upper part of the screen here. And when it refills through that big red tongue of lava, that big lava fall that pours from that upper level down into the lower level here. See, some pretty cool stuff here. That's our time lapse from the S1 camera, courtesy of the USGS HVO, as all of our data information today. Presenting it in a different format is accessible to you. All right. We'll turn to the geophysics, the plumbing. We look at that through earthquakes is one way. Earthquakes over on the island over the last week have been fairly normal. We're still having low level activity around Mauna. We'll come back to that. Pahala, low level activity is still happening there. You can see there's still having magnitude 3s over the past week here. Their most recent earthquake, there was one at a 3 kilometers depth on this flank zone here of Manalo, so 1.8, very small one. There was one earlier today that was over here in the south flank, not that far from Kalapana. 2.0, 4 kilometers depth. That's a south flank earthquake. That's normal. That's all part of the normal background that we see here. To show this more clearly, let's turn to the graphs. Here's a 1-year summit GPS across Kilauea, both sides of the crater, how far they're spreading apart. You can see they spread apart really fast before the eruption, and since then they relaxed. and you can see that they were kind of maybe in steady state, and more recently have become a more obvious, have exhibited this more obvious increase, very slow increase here, right? Slower increase than we saw at a similar point during an eruption a year ago over here, right? So that's interesting to note as well. Whereas the rift zone by Pu'o'o is still showing signs of contraction, the lines going down, things are coming closer together. So you see some short-term variations, but there's nothing really major. This is something we check in on just once in a while because you can't really see a whole lot of the fine resolution day to day. But the overall pattern is still holding, and that's what's important. Earthquake numbers over the last year were pretty low here, pretty steady. Right? That's where we are. Not a whole lot to talk about. Over the last month, you can see it looks like everything is more or less the same within this range of 70 to 30 earthquakes per day. That's all within normal background levels here. Within the last week, nothing really unusual there. We're still having some of these deep earthquakes in the conduit of Kilauea south of the summit here. That's still happening. And you can see that there's, close in time, a series of them right over there, right? That came from slightly deeper into that we normally call the deep zone, right? So maybe from really deep into normally deep there. But nothing coming up further with that particular sequence right in there. And over the last month, you can see here's a whole pattern. That's normal, south flank. There's all these orange and yellow ones all through here. We have some summit adjustments and Manalo adjustments all through here. Pahala has been fairly normal as far as we can tell here. And maybe the only unusual thing that's not always there is all these scatterings of blues and purples around the summit and south of the summit right through that deeper feeder source, which if we scroll down and look at a cross section here, that's all these clusters all through here. Nothing really crazy, but interesting to note that those are still ongoing, have been going on for a while now. Here's our depth time plot, and over the last month, and you can see it's been fairly steady with normal variations and eruptions. Nothing really to talk about there beyond that. So we'll wrap up here before we turn to some questions with a look at Mauna Loa. Mauna Loa's earthquakes are also pretty low, so we're still having earthquakes happening there, but you can see here's a rate still quite low. Nothing really alarming or even to talk about there. Whereas if we look at the GPS across the summit caldera, you can see that we had a slow spreading recent adjustment, and really since that most recent adjustment, with a little wiggle right through here, it's really hard to determine whether this is actually just part of the scatter of the noise or whether it's actually dropping or whether it's possibly staying still here. In any case, it's not doing anything very fast up or down, which is what matters here. Major change. So peeking into Mauna Loa, there is a view of Mauna Loa. Still a little bit of snow, not as much as we've seen over the last few months here, but since I've been showing you the webcam, I thought I'd pop it up here one more time again to give you a view of where we sit, and so you can see what snow is still up there as wind blowing against those crater walls or stuck in those cracks or fissures between the flows or that kind of thing. All right, there is a volcano watch that's been posted to hawaiitracker.com already. Today's edition, this week's edition, shares the new instrument that is called the absolute quantum gravimeter. So this discusses the absolute gravimeter here, the difference between absolute and relative gravity measurements, the continuous stations that are deployed across Kilauea, right? I won't go through everything in detail because this is not data we have online to share with you guys, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it. And but there are a couple of things here that I can point out. One is that the same model of this AQG has been installed on the north flank of Mount Etna in Italy, which frequently erupts, and so that's been a successful trial there. They're bringing it to Hawaii as a kind of a follow-up to that, right? So they're still calibrating and testing it, and at some point they'll be able to share meaningful interpretations from that. So there have been benchmark measurements, 65 benchmarks with gravity measurements over the island of Hawaii since the 1970s, and continuous ones that were installed from 2010 through around 2018 or a little bit later. Although for the last few years here, there have been no continuous gravity measurements. Summit collapses or just end of life. So because of the new funding they've gotten, they've redeployed a whole bunch of them. And so there are plans to install 2 new additional relative gravimeters at other locations in April of this year coming up here next. So just one more tool into the toolkit that helps measure geophysics around here. Besides the tilt meters, the GPS, the satellites through INSAR, we don't have those as often, but they're still there. All different ways to try to figure out whether the volcano is magma coming in at depth and coming out, how it deforms the surface, and all of that. And so as we wrap it up here today, I want to share a Twitter post by Tom Winder here. And here is his tweet of how to explain Caldera subsidence and reinflation to a general audience with no slides. Here's an animated GIF. Kilauea mentioned by name here, but you can see he's got this little model here where the pink is the lava. The lava is coming in through this conduit, filling the magma reservoir here below the caldera. And the caldera is rising and falling accordingly to where the magma is coming in around. Of course, that also affects the connection of magma to other parts, flank eruptions of the volcano. So that's kind of our general working model. I thought it'd cool to show this. Dane as well pulled this out for us to share. So pretty cool to see that version of it there, right? Maybe that helps some people. Very simplified, but pretty cool. And one last tweet here, coming from Cosme648333127. And this is time lapse using Copernicus and Sentinel false color images since October. So long-term time lapse, and what you're looking at is the area of this black, right? There's kind of two different. There's zoomed out, and then more zoomed in. You can see the edges of this black zone in the inner part of the crater here expanding outwards as the satellite flies over week after week after week and sees a slightly larger area of lava and graphs there. Okay, so Dane will say some thank yous. Any questions, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so first want to thank everybody that tuned in today. Viewers like you really do drive this type of program. We rely on the viewers to share this type of content and also to drive the algorithm, commenting and that kind of stuff, like subscribing. That all helps with the YouTube stuff. I know people get tired of hearing that, but it really does, help on YouTube. We do take donations on hawaiitracker.com/support. I do have a list of some of the recent donations. I want to acknowledge them. Mel S, Michelle B, Laura B, James P, Elizabeth W, Jessica N, Robert G, Catherine G, Jana K, Linda H, Mark D, Robert C, Craig L, Helen R, Jim B, and William B. Appreciate everybody that has made that kind of monetary donation. And if you want to make that too, we do take those on hawaiitracker.com/support. Hawaii Tracker is where we post all of our recent content. So if you want to see the most recent volcano watch from USGS, go ahead and pop over there. We do take questions in chat as well. So if anybody has any questions, we've been collecting those so far, but we'll try and keep an eye on the chat to see if anything comes across the wire as we're doing this Q&A right now. So with that, I think we can dive in. Yeah, I do want to also acknowledge Kilauea's Bar and Grill, which has been our longtime supporter for this channel. Kilauea's has two locations, the Poho location as well as their new Orchid Land location. The Poho location is not quite open as much as the Orchid Land one, so definitely give them a call first before you just drive in there. But they do indoor, outdoor dining with some traditional dishes with some unique local twists on them. So we definitely acknowledge and really appreciate Kilauea's for being the longtime supporter of the stream. So with that, I think we can dive into some of the questions that we got. We don't have many today, but figure since we're talking about the Caldera collapse with that little example, this would be good. Casey asks, how often does Caldera collapse on Hawaii volcanoes? How often does that type of thing occur? Broad strokes.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so it's really there is a matter of size as well, right? So to answer that properly, I have to kind of qualify it a little bit to say that the collapse that happened in 2018, we're now calling it a partial caldera collapse. Really, the western side of the caldera floor is what collapsed, and the whole eastern part was untouched. So it was only a piece of the caldera floor collapsed. So if we're considering all of that kind of partial collapse as part of the game, right, which we kind of have to because we don't know in the past exactly the extent of all the collapses and how deep or how far and whatever else, right, we can say that Before 2018, the last major collapse was somewhere around, I want to say, 1890s. There were some in the 1860s, 1840s. But really, the last major one that got the whole thing all together, we think, was somewhere in the era of 1600, 1620, 1640, 1680. That's the ballpark, depending on the timing of it exactly, right? Maybe back to 1500 even. But so it's been a long time to have since we've had a full one, and you could even argue that that one maybe wasn't. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think there's enough evidence that was probably a large one that encompassed the whole caldera, but there could have been other smaller ones in between then as well, right? That's kind of hard
Right.
to quantify it. So,
And also the thing I'd throw in there is just like every time that is that little example just showed, every time that there's a rift zone eruption, you see deflation up at the summit. It becomes a question of how big does it have to be to count? Like, where's your threshold, right? And that's clearly not well defined. So does a partial caldera collapse? What about, like, the 1920 collapse?
right. Yeah, there's been small subsidence, like like lava levels, like just sagging down, like does that count? I mean, because clearly there's
right.
It's much more dynamic than that, yeah, for sure. So maybe the best answer, if we consider the larger ones, right? Maybe 1500-ish was the one that we know occurred. The one before that we think was somewhere around 2200 years ago or something like that, or something like that. So you're looking at several hundreds of years to maybe not quite 1,000 years for the full cycle, and you can have many partial ones that can be quite large and dramatic, like we saw in 2018 in the middle of all that. And those might be more like possibly every few decades to every few hundreds of years, kind of thing, right? To get depending on the size of them. If you're looking at small things, you can that can happen every few decades for sure. The larger ones less frequently, maybe every what we saw in 2018, maybe every 100 years ish, 150 years ish. I don't know, just to throw a number out there since the last one, right? It's hard to tell because all the ones in the 1800s, we don't know like if that was small, how big they were, how to compare and delineate those intervals with those ones. That's the hard part there.
Right. We do have another question from Sean, who asks, can people fly a drone over the caldera? That would be a big old no. It's no, I don't know what it officially is, but it's illegal inside the national park to operate a drone anywhere. So yeah, over the caldera is a no-go. Next question is from David, who asks, is there a way to calculate magma volumes rising from the depths based upon seismic data?
On the seismic data, I don't think so as much. The seismic data is just telling us how the rocks are adjusting around it. So that can give you seismic data can give you an idea of the geometry of things, right? So like if you're trying to make a model and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to make a model like, well, what shape should I make my magma reservoir? You could look at areas where there's not any earthquakes. It's like, okay, well, that's an area that has more magma, and so we can see that area is like an oval, so I'm going to use an oval of those dimensions for my model. That's kind of what earthquakes are useful for, more so like setting the boundaries of the model. And once you have that kind of model, you have to look at things like deformation, whether it's tilt or GPS or INSAR ideally, and you can combine them and say, okay, if you have a model of that kind of shape and reservoir at so and so depth with so and so volume, and you see this change in the surface that we see with the GPS or the INSAR or the tilt, then that implies a likely change in magma volume of X. So you can get there with some assumptions on the way, but not just from the seismic data, seismic and surface information data.
What about that the Volcano Watch, the absolute quantum gravimeter? Would that be something more well adjusted for that kind of trying to monitor?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's one of the strengths of the gravimeter is that they're essentially measuring changes in mass. Gravity is the change in gravity is from a change in mass from magma coming in underground. So yes, you could get another way to calculate that without having to know anything about the shape and making assumptions about the model and then tie it to the ground information. You could actually just measure the gravity and say, okay, this change in gravity comes from this much extra mass coming in underground. I don't care where it is exactly, but it's down there somewhere. So absolutely, yes. Yeah. And that's why having so many different toolkits in the toolbox is important, and why all these different divisions of the USGS have to kind of deep dive with their tool and then come back and consult with each other to make sure everything is in sync. it's a really fascinating endeavor, the whole thing.
Got a question from GH who's asking about as the lava cools and crusts over, is the color variation you see on the surface, does that what does that have to do with? What is the process there to get the variations that we see?
Right. So if you notice, those areas that are discolored more whitish or yellowish are the areas that the gas has been coming out for the longest, or where lava has not covered those areas. So you have a possible discoloration of the rocks around it just from the actual extra heat and gas coming out, altering the rocks itself. But more likely, you have a deposition of sulfates and sulfur crystals around those vent areas that are dissolved in that gas, and then as it comes out and decompresses, it precipitates around those areas. That's the most colorful stuff you see. Whereas the actual rock that's altered from the steam and heat would be more of that kind of orangish or reddish color, right? And otherwise, you can get that variation, not quite reddish, but more brownish from the cinders of the original fountains of lighter stuff. And then you have the more silvery current lava that turns a little bit darker over time. So all those shades of gray and browns are different ages of lava, right? And depending on that formation, but I think you're talking about the minerals right around those gas vents in particular. So they're being precipitated by the gases coming out after the lava already is crusted. Good question, Mahalo GH.
And I think this will be the final little question. So you were talking about what maybe the conceptualization is underneath that cap on the lava lake. And Casey was just asking, so is underneath that crust, is it more like a Swiss cheese as opposed to like a fully liquid mass? Where you have partially solid and like half molten parts, and we've talked about that before, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I really don't know. We've only been speculating because we really don't know, and we haven't heard anything official, because probably the only thing you can do is speculate so far, right? Where I'm sure that they're trying to get at that with some of their data feeds there. You'd imagine that there is at least some central pool, we'll call it, that has mostly liquid in it, right? And maybe towards the edges you have more of the Swiss cheesy kind of stuff, right? Because there seem to be clear pathways where the lava seems to emerge, where it likes to ooze out more so than other areas. You might have more dominant pathways, but it doesn't mean that the areas in between them are necessarily fully solid either. It could be more gooey than slightly more solid, and semi-solid per se, rather than being fully solid, right? So that if you have enough pressure coming in, you can still rearrange things. It's not set, I don't think. That's really that's my take on it there, right? And maybe I should mention that all that happens still with that whole crust still rising as it's been doing, and I didn't really show it in the F1 camera. Maybe I pull it back. Last thing. There. So if I pause it and drag it real quick, let me do that. Maybe you can see that there are still cracks forming along this whole front edge of the crater floor here, and the thing is still rising, and it's rising faster in the middle than it is on the outer edges there. So that's still going on. So there's clearly still injection underneath the whole crust. The whole crust is still trying to lift and rise. It's rising a little more easily or faster in the middle, and seems to still be rising on the outsides there. But that crack is accommodating the difference in that speed, essentially right there. Right? So, but otherwise, we see a lot of ooze-ups occurring over here, and occurring over here, and occurring kind of over here, and then over here as well. So it could be that we are forming more established pathways with less variation over time, but it would be really cool to catalog where these ooze-ups have occurred over the whole history of the eruption and how it's changed over time, but it's not something we have at this point. Good question, and that would be an interesting line of research for somebody there.
All right. Well, yeah, I think that does it for questions today. We will be back next week at 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time, our normal time, with another broadcast, unless something changes, and then we will go live with a necessary update of any kind that's needed. But don't really foresee that in the immediate future. But next week, same time, same place. With that, I'll pass it back to you, Phil.
Yeah, the Eruption Outlook is good. I mean, lava viewing seems to be more reliable. It's still good. That's where we are, right? This is an era of good viewing that we hope lasts a long time, but it may not last forever, right? And the longer it does last, the more lava rises and fills that crater, the more places it's visible from, as we detailed a little bit today. And so viewing is just going to get better. Now's the time to check it out. Get interested to dive into it a little more, right? So a great time for us to educate, and the point of this always being that if something does occur, some change does happen that affects our communities, that we're as always better positioned to respond to that by being better educated our volcanoes.
Yep.
So mahalo all you guys for the support.
We did get a last minute donation from Gary Bryan, our longtime supporter. Appreciate it. He says, thanks, guys. And we appreciate the support, Gary.
Mahalo, Gary. Gary likes to always time it so he gets his own shout out. Mahalo, Gary. There it is. So yeah, that's our update this week. We'll be back with you guys next week, as Dane said. From HawaiiTracker.com, Dane DuPont, I'm Philip Ong. Aloha, everyone.